Last night, I teased, and it wasn't my intention to tease this and not pay it off, the Salon article, which is actually originally from alternate.org. Ooh, let me mute that. From alternate.org, where they are saying they have 7 of what they call the strangest libertarian ideas, including that parents should be allowed to let their children starve to death. That is what they claim is a libertarian idea. And I would like to address that here in a moment. So, Mark, you're a libertarian kind of guy. Do you think parents should be allowed to let their children starve to death? That's what Salon.com and Alternate are claiming that libertarians believe, or at least some. They do make the statement in the introduction to this 7 points they have, the 7 what they call strangest libertarian ideas. They do make it clear. They say, obviously, not every self-proclaimed libertarian believes these ideas, but they say libertarianism is a space which nurtures them. Mark, are you on board with that one?
I am not, but I would claim that anybody who is both libertarian and pro-choice should be. As a matter of fact, I think anybody who's pro-choice should be.
Hold on. You're saying anyone who's pro-choice or libertarian should be in favor of allowing parents to let their children starve to death?
I'm afraid that to me sounds like the same thing.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if you can, I believe that life starts at conception. And so, therefore, if you can kill your child in the womb, you should be able to kill your child out of the womb.
You're not being serious about
I
that.
am.
You are being serious.
No. I believe that abortion is the ending. This is really what the conversation's about. And I don't know why you would want to talk about Murray Rothbard's theory on parents being able to starve their children to death in front of me. You really should have talked about this on a Friday night when
I don't know what you're getting at, but go ahead.
Other folks were around who were pro-choice. But no, I think that that's what Murray Rothbard's saying. He's saying...
Well, we haven't quoted Murray Rothbard yet. Would you like me
you
to
asked
quote
me,
Murray Rothbard? I was only asking you if you supported parents being allowed to let their children starve to death.
But I've read these books, Ian. So you asked me a question, and the answer I have to say is no. I believe that the creation of a child is a tort. You have put a person, an individual, in a situation of helplessness, and therefore you have an obligation. What is that obligation? I think that obligation is to provide a modicum of care at the very minimum to get them to a situation where someone else can care for them.
That seems totally reasonable to me. So let me get into this here from Salon.com. Number 1 on their list of 7 strangest, what they call libertarian ideas, parents should be allowed to let their children starve to death. They say, we're not making this up. From progressive writer Matt Brenning comes this excerpt from libertarian economist Murray Rothbard. Quote, a parent does not have the right to aggress against his children, but also should not have a legal obligation to feed, clothe, or educate his children, since such obligations would entail positive acts coerced upon the parent and depriving the parent of his rights. The parent therefore may not murder or mutilate his child, and the law properly outlaws a parent from doing so. But the parent should, claims Rothbard, have the legal right not to feed the child, i.e. to allow it to die. This, to me, is a terrible excerpt. I don't know from what it is excerpted.
I would have to look it up. It might be for A New Liberty.
But I think that it's libertarian statements like this, which, for lack of a better term, I'll just call a libertarian macho flash, I think are very detrimental to the movement in general. I mean, this sounds monstrous.
It does sound monstrous, but it is not by any means relegated simply to the libertarian movement. This is relegated to the pro-choice movement. I mean, really, Ian, consider for a moment, if you can kill a child that is, 8 months, a baby in the womb at 8 months, and this is what they call these late-term abortions.
Fetus.
Okay, you can call it what you want.
Yeah, you can call it whatever you want, too.
They survive at 8 months. You could cut that child out, give it to someone else, and it would survive. So I think that a parent has an obligation to do that in that situation. I think that's why it's outlawed in many places around the world. But then, what's the difference between that child passing through, a vagina and then being put in somebody's arms and then killing it?
I think the difference is that once something is outside of the womb, it
looks different.
You can't starve a child in the womb unless the mom starves herself at the same time. So you can't really do the same thing in that circumstance. With the case of what Murray Rothbard is saying here, it makes it it's people like this that make the libertarian movement sound callous and just really awful.
I disagree entirely. This is not a libertarian statement that Rothbard's making.
Murray Rothbard is known as
the libertarian.
I don't know if he's the libertarian, but he's known as a libertarian. He's a published libertarian. He's an influential libertarian on a lot of people. And I think that the most people would not agree with this particular statement. Even most people in the liberty movement, that
most people don't take the radical pro-choice stance. That's true, but there are people, many people.
I don't see why you keep bringing this to pro-choice. We're talking about letting a child die outside of a womb. We're talking about a child, a baby, letting it just starve to death, and that's not okay. And I don't think most libertarians, even the supermajority of them, would agree with that, regardless of what their position is on abortion. I'd like to just put that aside for a moment.
Okay, put it aside for a second. Let me ask you this question. You have to do things.
You haven't even let me make my point on this, so we'll come back with more here in moments. The toll-free number is 855-450-FREE. I think it is statements like this, written in this sort of, well, that's outrageous sort of fashion, this bombastic method of writing. I don't think it communicates the idea. Whatever idea he's trying to communicate is not communicated very effectively here if you're talking about letting babies die of starvation. I think libertarians need to find some compassion when they talk to people. It's Free Talk Live. There's a disturbing quote cited in a Salon.com article here, and we're going to get to your calls here in a moment, just to kind of recap, where Murray Rothbard, who is now passed away, was saying that he believes essentially that a parent should...
Was it 1998?
When he died? I don't know.
I think so.
But a parent should have the legal right to not feed their child, i.e. to allow it to die. The Salon article goes...
I don't think Murray Rothbard would have said that it was a legal right at all.
This is an alleged quote from him here from some book that he wrote.
Does he use the term illegal?
The parent should have the legal right not to feed the child, i.e. to allow it to die. And I think that it's statements like that.
Hard to believe somebody who called themselves an anarchist would claim that somebody had a legal right.
These callous statements are some of the worst part about this movement. Look, I get it. You know, freedom, it works. It's a great idea. But if you're not prepared to communicate the ideas with compassion to people, I don't think you should bother. Well, I really don't think you should.
Rothbard was an academic, and that it has sort of a different...
I don't care what the excuse is for why he writes this way.
Sure, yes, he's not writing, in some cases, not writing books to convince people, but to convince academics. Mm-hmm. And so here I would ask you this point. Now, don't
academics have emotions and feelings too?
Yeah, but they're not supposed to be using them when
That's ridiculous.
Okay, so let me ask you this. What's the obligation that a parent has to feed another human being?
I think there's a
person has
social and a moral obligation there.
A social obligation? How did that social obligation get created?
Through peer pressure.
Okay, that's not an obligation. All right.
Well, it is an obligation if somebody else comes along and says, hey, you're not feeding your child, I'll be taking that from you, and then takes your child from you, and then you want to try to get it back in court, you're going to fail.
You wouldn't have that ability if you had failed as a parent at that point. Like a parent, and hopefully a parent that chooses not to feed their child, wouldn't be coming after somebody who took it away to give it a better life.
Well, I would hope not, too. So I think that there's pressure. The reason why people behave in certain ways, you wear clothes outside.
Yeah, but that's not an
obligation. Because
social pressure isn't an obligation.
Okay, if you're asking me if there's a legal obligation, then
I'm not asking you about illegal
obligations.
I don't believe in legal obligations. Okay. I don't believe
what
that people.
What are you asking then?
I'm asking how the obligation was created.
Well, you just said you don't believe in a legal obligation.
Well, legal obligations means that a bunch of liars have gotten together in some city they call a capital and written stuff down on a piece of paper, right?
I think it's like I said. It's you can say that there's no social obligation. That's fine. There's not, but I think that somebody else could come in and step in and pick up that role.
I'm not claiming there's an obligation. Please understand me. I believe that a tort was created. That the two parents got together. They created a person who is in a situation that they cannot take care of themselves. Any other time you put somebody in a situation they can't take care of themselves, you have an obligation to make them whole. In this case, when you create a life, you have the obligation to bring that person to personhood. Now, I think
personhood because of what other people think about it and because of a moral code, right? That's not because you have an obligation legally.
Well, torts,
or because you've signed a contract.
torts are about harming somebody.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is. That's what it means.
Yes.
And you put that there's some similarities between creating a life and putting somebody in a situation where they can't care for themselves. I believe there is an obligation. I'm asking you, since you don't believe that, how the obligation was created.
What makes you? Why are you putting words in my mouth? I just told you. I think it's a social and a moral obligation put on people by society, and society is a group of people who are together for a common purpose. If you were living in a society where people just hated babies and all of them wanted to torture babies,
so there's an obligation.
Then it wouldn't matter.
So there is an obligation.
That's what I'm telling you.
When was the obligation created?
There is no. It's not an obligation like something that was written down on a piece of paper. So there's no date stamped on it.
I don't mean that. I'm not claiming that. I'm not claiming that there is.
It was something that was created over time.
Over time.
Yeah, through interactions of human beings deciding what they thought was appropriate as far as behavior.
The individual case with the individual baby. At what moment did one become obligated to care for a child?
Let's see. At what moment? That's a great question. I would say probably as soon as it comes out.
So you don't have any obligation to care for a child.
No, because you could put a gun to your head and kill yourself if you were a female, and obviously that would eliminate any obligation you might have to care for the fetus that's inside you. You could also drink poisons, or you could do things to harm your body that would harm by proxy the part of your body that is growing us into a separate person, but is not yet, in point of fact, a separate person.
Yeah, I suppose you could do that, but I think that you're harming somebody else when you do that.
Yeah, and there's an argument to be made there that the person who's inside you could perhaps have a tort against you if you, let's say, drank heavily during the pregnancy.
Fetal alcohol syndrome is a reality.
Yeah. But has anybody ever actually won a case like that? I don't know if
I would bet they have, but I couldn't,
that's pure speculation. Let's continue here. We'll go to your calls and thoughts. We've been talking, in this case, about Salon's list, and actually it's Alternet's original list, of what they call the 7 strangest libertarian ideas. And one of them is that Murray Rothbard claimed that parents should have the legal right to not feed their children, which I think it's a horrible statement to make and is not couched in any compassion whatsoever, in any explanation. We'll come back with more of this story here. But first, let's go to Dana in Grand Rapids listening to WTKG. Hello, Dana.
Hi. Guys, I have 2 things to say. The second one is to Mark. The first one, and I've talked to you guys before, just as recent as a couple weeks ago, and I've told you I'm a conservative, and I think conservatives if you were to compare tit for tat, which doesn't really matter, but they more align themselves. They're very similar to libertarians, maybe a little different on some social. Oh, I know.
I think at a state level, they tend to. On a national level, when it comes to the war issue, that it can be a really, really contentious issue.
No, you're. Please don't confuse conservatives with. And I don't disagree entirely with that. But we're not Republicans. They're different because the Republicans are more like the Democrats, and the Democrats are really progressives now because liberal is supposedly a dirty word, and they didn't want to, especially after the 2010 elections, did not want to be called liberal, so they had to come up with a new name. The Republicans are not coming up with a new name. We're not rebranding ourselves. We really disagree with what the Republicans are doing. That's exactly why. And I'm not a member. I don't know a lot about the Tea Party, but that's why the Tea Party started. It wasn't anti-Obama, anti-black, or anti-Democrat or liberal. It was anti-Republican and all the big spending George Bush did.
I'd agree with that.
I have two. And I have two. But they malign that Tea Party to death. People don't even know the history. If you hate them for the right reasons. Don't make stuff up. Okay, that being said, I have 2 things to say, and like I said, the second is to Mark. First of all, brace yourself because you guys are libertarians, and I do agree with a lot of what you say. That's why I listen to you regularly, and it's a Saturday night, and I'm single, and I could be doing a lot of other things, but I make sure I'm listening to you from 7 to 9 Saturday night. So
you are what they call in radio an appointment listener.
I love you guys.
Welcome.
But
Go ahead.
I don't agree with everything you say.
That's okay.
But I want you to brace yourself, and everyone listening.
I'm bracing right now.
This is what the progressives do. Salon is so left, you can barely see them. They're that far off the planet. This is what they do. They either, if you're talking to them, they talk over you, or they they talk over you, they change the subject, they refuse to answer, or they mock you. And if they cannot get you on those things, they will just bold-faced malign you in print.
Well, in this case, they're just using the words of a libertarian. I mean, they're quoting a libertarian.
But they're
I wouldn't say they're doing any of the things you're suggesting in this, at least in this paragraph of this article.
And I'm not calling about this guy saying he said it or didn't. Obviously, it came from his book. But notice how they pick certain things and take things sometimes out of context because remember,
honestly, Dana, I get what you're saying, but I don't think that the conservatives are any less indicted on this. I mean, they all sort of use the same tactics against one another. There's all kinds of lying and misinformation all over the place.
No, and I'm not saying conservatives are flawless. I never said that, but not to the extent the progressives.
Hit me with your second point, the one from Mark. Go ahead.
Okay, the second point is, but also I wanted to say one last sentence about the first point, an old saying: if you tell a lie and it's big enough and you say it enough times, it becomes the truth. People start believing it. Maybe not your listeners.
All right,
you're
second
a
point.
Type of listener. Second point, Mark, I have an unbelievable, whole newfound respect for you. I too believe that whether you're late-term abortion or early, it's taking a life. And I want to say one thing on this, and this I feel very strongly on. Nobody, not you, Mark, not Ian, not me, not anyone listening, knows when a soul is breathed into that baby.
Thanks, Dana, for the call tonight. I appreciate it. The toll-free number is 855-450-FREE. Well, you know, there's actually an interesting extension of this conversation that goes on here in the Salon piece, and we'll get to that here in a moment, but it asks the question, and I think it's an interesting follow-up, as to what if your baby isn't healthy? What if the baby that comes out is a mess, like physically a mess, health-wise, terminal illness, horrible disfigurement.
Right, and this is
like
a really interesting point because, for instance, what Rothbard claims here is that a parent does not have an obligation to take care of a child, right? Mm-hmm. This is interesting. Now, I don't necessarily believe this, but let's go on with it for a second. Let's say that now consider that morality is static. Consider possibly that morality has been it's the same 10,000 years ago for hunter-gatherers as it is today. As a matter of fact, there are hunter-gatherers that exist right now. So if you're a hunter-gatherer woman and you live on the edge of starvation, you live on the edge of dying, life expectancy is 22 for your little band of years old for your little band of troopers, whoever you guys are. Do you have a moral obligation to take care of a child who, for instance, is born with no arms and no legs?
Mm-hmm. How much money does that cost, whether you're a hunter-gatherer or in our society?
Hunter-gatherers don't have money, so what it costs them is a great deal of time
and effort,
that comes away from their other children, that comes away from their spouse, that comes away from their family unit.
We can expand on that in a moment. We have a story here, which is from alternetandsalon.com. Article is written by Richard Esco, and he is criticizing libertarians, as has been seen quite a bit at Salon. And I was suggesting last night that might be because the liberty movement is kind of gaining a little bit of steam.
They're scared.
So yeah, I mean, you don't get attacked unless you're over the targets, as they say. And the number one claim here of what they say is the 7 strangest libertarian ideas is that Murray Rothbard, who is a libertarian thinker who passed away a couple decades ago.
Big time. I mean, important.
They say that he's the quoted here is saying that the parent should have the legal right to not feed the child, i.e. to allow it to die. Let me go on with the comments here, and we'll get back into your calls and thoughts. So the article author ends Rothbard's first quote, and then he adds in, note the repetitive use of the word it to describe the child. This linguistic dehumanization of helpless individuals is surprisingly common in libertarian literature. Rothbard is a member of the so-called Austrian School of Economics, co-founded the Ludwig von Mises Institute, and is widely admired among libertarians. He continues, another quote from Rothbard, "The law, therefore, may not properly compel the parent to feed a child or to keep it alive. Again, whether or not a parent has a moral rather than a legally enforceable obligation to keep his child alive is a completely separate question."
I thought when referring to a child, oftentimes I've felt like, okay, so like we've got a young child. My son is 6. And many times when you're dealing with literature that, advice for parents, it'll attempt to put a pronoun in place of the child, and it'll say he or she, and it oftentimes
it's clunky.
Well, yeah,
it's
is.
clunky.
It's very clunky because if you just use he, then the newly burgeoning women's movement, the feminists out there tend to get a little upset. You use the masculine pronoun. Now, I disagree with that. I was taught that in our school, a woman in English said, the way she looked at it was that men had to share their pronoun, where women had one that was dedicated directly to them. So, in fact, that it favored women as opposed to otherwise. But anyway, so if somebody uses, for instance, the she in referring to your child, you shouldn't leave your child in the car because she may be, become warm. Well, I'm confused because I have a male child and I don't have a female child. So when you use the female she in there, you can use he, she, often he or she. I use the S/HE when I write.
Well, I suppose he could continue to refer to the child, but then that gets repetitive, right? So instead of saying
it is, in my opinion, in this circumstance, fine,
okay.
Not necessarily dehumanizing.
I think it's the weakest critique in this particular paragraph.
But I would also point out that there are plenty of progressive thinkers that think similar things about children.
So Rothbard goes on to say, this rule allows us to solve such vexing questions as, should a parent have the right to allow a deformed baby to die, i.e. by not feeding it? The answer is, of course, yes, following a fortiori from the larger right to, this is why I don't read academic books, from the larger right to allow any baby, whether deformed or not, to die. Though, as we shall see, he claims, in a libertarian society, the existence of a free baby market will bring such neglect down to a minimum. So
I would agree that is also the case. If you could sell your child to someone who
is willing to take care of it.
Yeah, I don't think that I have a problem. I'm not claiming that I think it should be illegal, but I don't really want to promote the having of children so that you can sell them. I just have a problem with that. I just don't like it.
Right. So going back to this question of
I do think that kids that would be purchased would likely be, essentially, what's the difference between purchasing a child and adopting them when you can give an expectant mother a scholarship today? What's this scholarship mean? They can use it on so many things. This is purchasing a baby.
So I like the idea that somebody should be able to give away their child to someone who would be better or more interested in taking care of it. And I think that could also apply to a deformed child as well, because I think bringing up the question of what about this deformed or sick baby, or something that's really just comes out all wrong, and every now and then that'll happen.
Happens.
What do you do about that? Is the mother obligated to take care of something that she can't even afford to take care of, let alone have the time to take care of, because that's a very expensive process? And I think that the question of what to do about a deformed baby really brings this down to the real issue here, and that is, what are people's values? And in the case of children, they're different, obviously, right? You and I, Mark, have different beliefs about when life begins, what that means. Is it a baby? Is it a fetus? Things like that. Just right here in this room, we've got some very different ideas. But bringing the question to a baby like a deformed, crippled, really messed up, sick baby that would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars a year just to kind of keep alive, brings the question down to, is this about some sort of the people that are listening to this or considering these ideas, is this the question, is it really about the person's dedication to the idea that life is so precious that no matter what the circumstances, that it should be protected? Because there's a solid argument to say that even if you can get this sick, crippled baby through its first few years, that it's not going to have a particularly satisfying life after that. So is it wrong to put it like for instance, my dog gets sick. She's kind of old. If she gets really sick, a lot of dog owners will make the choice of putting the dog down.
And it's a really tough decision.
Yeah, it's not easy to do. These are your best friends, right? But it's also it's arguably a humane thing to do. The dog shouldn't be in pain. The dog shouldn't be coughing up black bile on a daily basis. This is not a good life, right? So, you put the dog out of its misery.
You either let owners decide when the best time to put their animal to sleep is, or you don't let owners make that decision.
Yeah.
And you probably, if you don't let owners make that decision, you probably don't want to call them owners either.
But it brings to the question, is it wrong to do the same thing with a baby that is obviously, sick, deformed, or whatever, is already having a tough time and is likely going to have a more tough time as time goes on and the body gets larger and all of that. So is it wrong? Is this all about protecting life? Is life worth protecting at any cost? If that life is arguably not going to be very great. Now, you could also argue that some sort of medical advancement will come along and that, within the next few years, all of these maladies that the child will have will be fixed via some sort of medical miracle.
That sounds like a miracle.
You could make that argument that could happen.
Yeah, my cousin has a child that has a lot of challenges, and it's really, really difficult. She can't take care of her on her own. She has to get state help to do it.
Right. And so again, it would obviously be okay to put that child out there and say, "Hey, look, I can't take care of this child. I was hoping for a healthy baby."
Who's going to do that? It's hard enough to get healthy children here in the United States that aren't babies.
There may be people who are interested, like, the Shriners take care of people with burns.
I know, but who's going to? It's hard to say.
Right. I'm not saying that there would be a line of people waiting for it, but there may be somebody who would say, "Look, life is so important to me that I'm willing to spend my life and all of my income and try to raise more money because it's really expensive. I'm willing to spend my life dedicating it to taking care of these crippled, sick, dying sort of babies." If somebody wants to step in and do that, they should be able to do that. But otherwise, shouldn't the parents be able to make the choice to say, "Wow, this is way more than we expected to take on. We don't believe that this child is going to have a good life, and we want to create a good life for our kids." Shouldn't they be able to make the choice to put the baby to sleep in that case? Oh, God. What do you think? 855-450-FREE. This is Free Talk Live.
I'd say
Hour 3
no.
is next. This is Free Talk Live. Bring up whatever's on your mind. And the toll-free number here is 855-450-FREE. We have just barely dug into the 7, what they call strangest libertarian ideas, according to Salon and Alternet. And the ostensible reason for all of this attention being given to libertarianism is likely because, well, the ideas seem to be having some level of an impact. People are interested in this. Ron Paul, for instance, really kind of stirring up the apple cart.
I would agree with you on that, but I would, however, claim that I would say that it's the popularity of the ideas, but I would say that it's mostly Rand Paul's at this point, the only Republican possibility for running for president. And I think that what they're trying to do is undermine the philosophy of libertarianism because they believe
Rand Paul's not even a libertarian, though.
That's what he says,
right?
But lots of people believe otherwise, right? On all sides of the political spectrum.
I'm going to go with what he says.
Fine,
he's the guy.
No, I didn't ask you whether or not you believed it because I know what you believe, Ian. Okay. You don't believe anybody who's not a libertarian on every issue every time is not a libertarian at all.
That's correct.
But Rand Paul's libertarian on many issues, and you would probably agree more issues than most politicians.
So anyway, we're talking about this first number here that we're according to some quotes from Murray Rothbard, who is a known libertarian thinker who wrote a number of books when he was alive. And they've quoted him saying he thinks the parent should have the legal right to not feed a child. And the way it comes off is kind of callous, and it brings up one of my critiques of the liberty movement. And you pointed out, well, this is an academic text. Well, okay, it's being read by average people, so let's try to be compassionate.
You wish that you wrote the academics wish that they wrote texts that the average person would read, but I get where you're coming from.
I can tell you, I read. I'd never actually read any Rothbard prior to the time I was in jail, and the book that I read by him was, I think,
For civil disobedience.
Yeah, the book that I read by him was, I think, For a New Liberty. And I thought it was a very easily readable book. It was written fairly easily, you know, as far as like not academic sounding. It wasn't highfalutin, you know.
I liked his Conceived in Liberty. I felt that it's a history, and it was, you know, it looked at history in a whole new light.
I actually was able to read through the book easily, and if I had felt it was academic, I'd probably have put it down, even though I was in jail and had nothing better to do, because academic texts always feel like I'm being talked above, and you know. But I didn't get that from him. Regardless, whether he writes in an approachable style or not is another question to how persuasive his points are. And just, you know, throwing it out there and suggesting that parents should be free to let their children just die, I think is that kind of callous, libertarians have no heart. That's where people on the left, for instance, get the idea that libertarians don't have a heart because of statements like this. And I'm just a general critic of that kind of thing. And I think that that's why I love Mary Ruwart and her book, Healing Our World, which I think is so excellent because she takes
it's hard to make that argument about her.
She takes the same ideas. She takes the same freedom-oriented ideas, and she communicates them in ways that are compassionate. She communicates them in ways that people can emotionally connect with. And because most people aren't going to think logically, especially when it comes to the question about, I don't know, what to do with a baby that is unwanted. And even further, as we were saying in the last hour, just to bring you up to speed in case you're just tuning in, the next question really, and I think this is an important one, and you threw an answer out at the very end of the segment, Mark, so I'd like you to expound on that. But the next question is, what about a baby that is, it's been born, and it's really messed up. It's got some kind of crazy deformities that are, pushed. Its heart is pushed up against its chest, and there's, some kind of disease that it's got, and it's not looking good. Maybe it's not even going to last 2 years. And if it does last the 2 years, it's going to be a very expensive 2 years. It's going to be in the hospital the whole time. One of those just horrifying situations, the last thing that any parent would want for their children. The question is, does the parent have the right to allow a deformed baby to die? But I'd go even further. Should a parent have a right to take the life of, through a doctor, through some sort of like Jack Kevorkian style situation?
Right. We're not talking about lopping its head off in the kitchen with a butcher knife.
No. Yeah. Like through the process of taking the dog to the vet and having the dog put down.
You do understand.
You said no, correct?
Well, you do understand that there is no moral difference between ending a child's life in the kitchen with a butcher knife and taking it to the hospital in order to be put down, or some clinic in order to be put down in a more humane way, right? Like you're talking about the view of things. The farmer goes to shoot Old Yeller.
Yep.
It feels bad because he's using a gun and he's doing it out back. Mm-hmm. But when my cat, Senor Grouchy Pants, passed away a few years ago, he had bone cancer. Both of his legs were broken from jumping off of the counter onto the floor, or a chair, a high chair onto the floor. And he was in terrible condition. He wasn't going to live much longer. Putting in his legs in splints wasn't going to do him any good. So I had the vet put him down, and he sort of went to sleep. And, by the way, they had to give him a double dose. Like, that's just how mean this animal was. He was just that mean. He was burning through their death serum. But, I loved him, and it seemed fine and peaceful the way he went. She stayed with me. The vet stayed with me the whole time, and off he went. But really, what's the difference between me taking him out and putting a bullet in his head in the backyard? It would have been,
the difference is the perception.
It's completely the perception.
But I don't know if, and I think that really this is part of the larger question here that we're discussing is it really immoral to end the life of something that is in suffering? And I don't think it is.
It's very difficult to talk about. Right?
Why would it be moral to end your dog or cat's life, but not the child?
Because
not the deformed, sick child.
I remove non-human persons from the debate when talking about making decisions on life and death because I still eat meat. Okay, so if you want to have a conversation about eating meat, I'll be happy to have that conversation with you. But at this point, I choose to decide when my animals live and when they die.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're talking about people, currently no one lets me make a decision on when other people die, and they shouldn't. Because I believe I'm significantly better than most people. I think I'm smarter. I think I'm more aware. I pay attention. Lots of people out there.
So ridiculous.
They don't. I see. You can decide.
I don't agree with you on that.
You can decide when a baby's in pain, and you can decide when they're suffering, and you can decide when they need to go.
I'm not saying that. I can't have a baby. I had a vasectomy at age 23, so I don't have to face any of these questions in my life.
Yeah, isn't that convenient?
It is convenient. As a matter of fact, it was the best $700 I'd ever spent. It's very convenient. Highly recommend vasectomies, gentlemen. And so anyway.
It's the only male birth control. Well, that and condoms.
Obviously a decision like that isn't something that anyone takes lightly. Never is it taken lightly unless you're a psychopath to take that lightly. And it would be a decision made based on medical advice. It would be a decision made based on what is the best in the opinion of the people who care the most, not in the opinion of some judge or in the opinion of our callers or whoever. Speaking of callers, let's go to Corey. Corey is calling from Georgia, and he is on Skype. Our Skype username, by the way, is lrn.fm, so feel free to connect with us there. Go ahead, Corey.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Hey there.
I've been listening, and my head's been wanting to explode between Mark conflating Rothbard's principle with pro-choice, pro-life abortion policies, and ESCO conflating Rothbard with all libertarianism. I think both of these are huge mistakes with collectivist thinking going on. If we look at it, respect for the individual or a disrespect for the individual has led to some of the most significant horrors in the history of the world. If you look at the 20th century and the plight that progressivism has had on the entire world, we're talking about one theoretical child, and progressivism led to eugenics. It's led to believing that the group was better than the individual, and that the individual could be treated in any way for the benefit of the state and the government.
Corey, I want you to hang on. We'll bring it back here, let you make your point with more time. 855-450-FREE. That is the toll-free number brought to you by ProXPN. Your thoughts are certainly welcome. It's Free Talk Live. And Corey, you had precious little time to really begin to say anything in the last segment, so go ahead with what your point was.
Yeah, really all I was saying was that this is one instance where the principle of respecting the individual is being applied by Rothbard. But at least libertarians are honest enough to say what the logical conclusions of principles might be legally. That does not give it, just like Rothbard says, this does not mean that morally or socially this is the right thing to do. But if you apply the same logical principle, the same logic to the principle of respecting the individual, then there's no way that you would be able to aggress against another human being and euthanize them after they're born.
I don't understand what you're saying there.
Okay, so you were talking about being able to euthanize a child who was born deformed.
Yeah.
If you apply that principle, then you can't say that you can actively do something to end their life. Because if you're respecting their individuality as a human being and their individual rights, then you have no right to end their life. That is essentially saying, well, I can't afford this, so for the good of the group, for the good of me, I'm going to end that person's life.
Well, it could also be the good of the child who is deformed and maybe even in pain.
You don't get to make that decision.
Why not? You made the decision to bring it into the world. Why can't you decide the reverse?
Okay, let's start applying that principle to other things. You don't get to make decisions for other people. If all people, you'd think that you would understand that.
So, wait. So you're saying that in your mind, it's more humane and more moral to allow a in-pain, deformed child to starve to death rather than put it out of its misery?
No, this is where you're missing the point, Ian. Where you're missing the point is that it's not about whether it's moral. It's whether when you apply the principles logically where you end up. And this is the reason that Rothbard shouldn't be used to malign the libertarian movement, because he's an academic making a very theoretical point. Within academia, you do that, except for libertarians are actually honest about what the logical conclusions might be of libertarianism and what the ethics of libertarianism.
But isn't libertarianism a moral philosophy? I mean, isn't the idea of non-aggression, not aggressing against individuals?
But the point here is, Ian, is if you, because essentially that is aggression, right? Like, okay, so if a child is, has terrible deformities and likely not to live 20 years or whatever, killing it is aggression, right?
I think that's definitely an argument that you could make.
Now,
but you're saying that leaving it to starve isn't.
What's that?
You're saying leaving it to starve is not an act of aggression?
You haven't done anything at that point. That's the argument that that Rothbard's making. Now, let me ask you this. A child's completely healthy, but 2 years old, needs your help. You don't want to give that help anymore. I believe there's some sick dude that's on trial recently for having his child left, a 22-month-old, leaving it in the car to cook.
Yes, and those people are disgusting.
Right.
Morally disgusting.
Why shouldn't, if you can put a unhealthy child out of its misery, why can you not put a healthy child out of its misery? And if you can put a healthy child out of its misery, why can you not put a healthy adult that you brought into this world? For instance, I'm 43. Why can my 73-year-old mother not kill me? I mean, you have to be able to apply these things consistently, or you don't have a philosophy. You have a bunch of willy-nilly emotional bullcrap. Now, you can have that because that's the world we live in. We live in the willy-nilly emotional bullcrap world. But if you want to talk about a philosophy, let's talk about a philosophy. If you want to talk about willy-nilly emotional bullcrap, call in at 855-450-FREE, and you can you can lambaste me for taking a theoretical
Well, the reason
position.
why things are looked at as moral or immoral just has to do with how people feel and think about those things, right? So obviously when it comes to...
I disagree entirely.
Okay.
I think that there is a moral truth in the universe.
I disagree.
Yes, I know.
Right.
So you can go on with your willy-nilly emotional bullcrap, defining morality in whatever way you want, and whatever feels good.
You're defining your morality in however way you want to as well.
I believe that
it's all subjective, isn't it?
I believe that we can logic our way to it. You don't believe in logic. You don't believe it exists.
What are you talking about?
You believe it is an agreement between
That's
people.
ridiculous. Corey, go ahead.
I don't know about what you just said, Mark. I don't know if you can logic your way to it, because when you start applying your limited knowledge, that's what Hayek always was talking about, is that we have limited knowledge.
Hayek didn't believe in true libertarianism either.
Corey, thanks for the call. I appreciate it. Toll-free number is 855-450-FREE. That's 855-450-3733.
Neither did Mises.
Who's right? What about you? What do you think? It's Free Talk Live. So let's see. We were just talking about the question, or I asked the question of the non-aggression principle. The statement was made that, well, it's bad to get rid of the libertarian position, seems to be, and this is your position, right, Mark? That it's bad to end on purpose a disfigured, diseased baby's life that's going to have a horrifying life. It's already having a horrifyingly painful, terrible life. You're saying it's wrong to do that because it's a violation of the principle of non-aggression. But aren't there situations in which that principle doesn't really make any sense?
Well, I don't know that it necessarily isn't even a violation of the non-aggression principle, and that it might be more fundamental. So there's this old sort of ethical question. You are standing at a switching station. It is not your job. You are simply happen to be at a switching station. You are not paid by the railroad station as a switcher or anything like that. You just happen to be here. There is a careening train coming down the tracks. It is out of control. There is a person tied up on the tracks. You could pull the bar on the switcher, and you could kill the train and the engineer, or you can leave it in place and it will kill the person on the tracks. What do you do? And then whatever decision you make, you're then vilified for your answer, right? Like, you're bad, you're wrong, and all the guesses are made. You got it? Well, the fact is, if you hadn't been there, you have a moral obligation, the same moral obligation that a person in a coma has, which is to say you have no obligation to stop that train from running over that person.
That's correct.
You may say, oh, right, there are 6 people tied up and there's 1 person in the cab of the train. I will trade 1 life for 6. And I think that many people...
Then you've chosen to end someone's life at that point.
You have then chosen to end the life of an individual, and you have chosen to save the life of 6. And many people would agree with you, and you probably won't go to prison or anything like that. But do you understand?
What does that have to do with the question of the deformed baby?
Because if one chooses not to make an action, one has not made a moral choice. Whereas when one chooses to make an action, one does make a moral choice. The killing of a child is different than letting a child starve to death. Now, I have a great deal of sympathy, Ian, and I probably would err with you. That if we were in a situation like, I don't know, you and I are stranded with a deformed baby on a desert island, survival is hard enough for you and I as it is. This baby is likely to not survive, the course of 3 or 4 weeks. We might as well do it now. Like, I get it. I understand where we're at. But understand that this is simply a moral dilemma, an abstract moral dilemma, and in that point. Because today, in this culture, people will take care of babies that are in this condition, generally, or somebody will take them on, generally. So when you're talking about today in the United States or Western civilized countries, then this question sort of becomes moot. If you're talking about people who are hunters and gatherers in Papua New Guinea, nobody's proposing to fly airplanes over and bomb them because they make these decisions.
All right, so that didn't answer my question, but we'll go back to that here in a moment. Charlotte is with us first, though, listening in Washington, somewhere in Washington. You're on Free Talk Live, Charlotte.
Yes. Your analogy is really fantastic. Let me bring it down to earth a little bit with a little background. My mother used to teach crippled children in a hospital school situation. She was with them for 30 years. This was quite a while ago, but and before she started teaching there were many parents who would reject these deformed children and give them to the home and hospital for the crippled children.
Yeah.
That was the decision that the parents made. Then the decisions were up to the powers that be, and of course they were professionals and all this kind of stuff. And many times the deformities were more abhorrent to the parent than they were to the professionals who had means to help these children. In many cases, they survived, and they had very good lives. Another thing is we don't ask the child. Naturally, we don't ask a newborn because they can't make that choice for them.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But as teaching these children after they were in the home and hospital for crippled children for a number of years, she had the dilemma of what she would have done had that child been hers. And so she asked the kids. And she said, if you had a chance, and of course this was a moral question for her, if you had a chance to go to heaven without living with your deformities, or if you had the chance to say you wanted to live, what would your choice be? And to every child, they wanted to live because they could manage their difficulties.
Very interesting. How many children do you think she asked this question of? I mean, it's an informal poll, I understand, but I love a poll as much as the next guy.
Oh, this was a classroom of first graders. She had varying sizes of classes, of course, and after polio was eliminated, the hospital had to change their focus because they didn't have enough patients. Hallelujah.
Yeah, I guess that makes perfectly good sense. And it's interesting she included heaven in this question, right? Like, so she gives, the great opiate as an option, and everyone still chooses life.
It's interesting. Charlotte, thanks for sharing that story. I appreciate hearing from you.
Free Talk Live, 7 nights a week from 7 to 10 Eastern, live on the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.